Okay, so we are talking about mixed media. So we're going to talk about Laura Schnitger. She actually drapes and stretches fabrics over wooden armatures, which are typically supportive pieces found on the interior of sculpture, 3D sculpture. And she creates both the sculpture and a hollow interior space. So this is a Los Angeles-based female artist, and she kind of straddles the boundary between sculpture and fashion design. So somewhere between, human and non-human with a lot of her figures that she makes. So this piece that we're going to take a look at is called Grim Boy. It's 2005. And it's wood, fabric, and other media, so it's definitely a mixed media piece. It's fairly large, around 6 feet tall. And it uses various dark colored fabrics together with beads and fur to suggest a mannequin from hell. And it has kind of a tense, lurking quality, and it does exude kind of a nervous energy of an adolescent teenage boy, which definitely kind of ties into the work's title, Grim Boy. It stands almost 6 feet tall, and it does have kind of a bird-like quality, almost like a beak up here. And it does remind us of maybe a trench coat-clad youth, which also kind of ties into that Grim Boy title for this piece. And this has also kind of, with the artist, an additional feminist message, because she's doing a sort of dressmaking, which is definitely a traditional women's art form. But rather than creating these beautiful adornments, she's creating fashions that are highly curious quasi-human beings. So she's definitely kind of doing that traditional dressmaking, but just reimagining it in a less traditional way. So there is kind of a feminist element to her work as well. So we'll talk about Nick Cave's sculptures. He uses an extremely wide variety of media, and we'll look at his art, one of his sculptures titled Sculpture, and it basically includes a lot of found objects. So we can see there's an antique couch, this ceramic dog with these metal flowers that he's put together, among a lot of other things. It has a really strong element of fantasy. So the artist, he typically will shop at thrift stores, and he'll keep an object for years before deciding to use it in a sculpture. And he really wants to counteract the natural tendency humans have to categorize things. So he'll put kind of unlikely things together. I think he really enjoys taking things and juxtapositioning them next to each other in kind of unusual ways. And playing with the relationships between objects as well. So you can see, this is a soft velvety surface, and this is a shiny surface here. And so he's playing with the relationships between the forms of these different objects that he finds. So kind of an interesting way of doing things. So we'll take a look at the installation and site-specific art. So many artists now use the three-dimensional medium of installation to make their visual statements. In an installation, the artist treats the entire space as an artwork and transforms it. So we'll talk about Raphael Lozano Hemmer and his piece Airborne from 2013. It's an installation in Mexico City. So he used all the walls of the gallery to create this piece, Airborne, basically projecting text from news stories onto the walls. And then when viewers pass them, they cast shadows onto the block of text. Obviously, standing farther away from the wall creates a larger shadow. And then if viewers actually remain stationary, the heat rising from their bodies takes on kind of the appearance of smoke, which really distorts the news items on the walls. And so it's kind of an entertaining way for viewers to kind of interact with the news of the day, basically. So some installations are intended for only one particular location, and these works are called site-specific. And we'll take a look at a site-specific piece next. It's definitely the best known work of a site-specific art in the United States. And it really became famous because a lawsuit came out around it in the 80s that kind of tested the limits of an artist's power. So in 1981, this sculpture by Richard Serra was installed. It was called Tilted Arc, so we'll take a look at that. Here it is. And it was installed in the plaza adjoining a federal office building in New York City. And it's basically just kind of a tilting, curving blade of steel 12 feet high. So it's actually quite high. And soon after its installation, the office workers began to complain about it because it blocked their view. It forced them to walk around it. So it was quite a large detour for a lot of people. And it became basically a homeless shelter. The homeless population started using this as a place of residence, basically. And then it began even to collect graffiti, which, wasn't very attractive. So the government announced plans to relocate this work, and the artist actually filed a lawsuit, claiming that this piece, Tilted Arc, was meant for that specific spot, and to relocate it would destroy it and destroy its meaning. But the artist ended up losing the case. But the matter did not turn on any legal requirement of site specificity. Rather, the court held that the government, as owner of the work, could dispose of it. After years of court cases, this piece was finally moved in 1989. So, it didn't take long for it to become a problem, obviously, because 9 years later, after it was installed and many years in court, it was finally removed in 1989. So we'll take a look at one more site-specific work by Olafur Eliasson. It's called Waterfall. It was done in 2016. It's definitely a mixture of media. It's found at the Palace of Versailles in France. And if anybody knows anything about the Palace of Versailles, that's where it was made famous by Louis XV. He did the most work and the most construction on that place, on Versailles. And it's a really amazing piece of architecture found in France. Kind of a leftover of the monarchy, really, a different way of life where one person held so much wealth and so much power. And you can really see it in that palace because it's just so extravagant. But this piece is found on the grounds of the Palace of Versailles, and it was done in 2016. And the artist, created a stunning site-specific work for the Gardens of Versailles, which is outside of Paris. And there's a waterfall, as you can see, and it's a huge cascade. And it seems to appear out of nowhere. And this is a very extreme version of the waterfalls and fountains that have graced this property since the 16th century. So definitely a huge tradition of fountains and waterfalls can be found on the Versailles property, but this is obviously the ultimate statement of that, right? Like the artist is really taking that to the next level with this piece. It almost has a dreamlike, surrealistic quality because it looks like it's literally pouring from the sky. And I think that's what the artist was going for. And he might have been making a comment on the extravagance of Versailles. And with this piece, you can see if it's definitely the ultimate waterfall for the grounds at Versailles. So there's definitely a metal scaffold and a lot of pumps that carry the water from the lake to a height that the artist actually refuses to divulge. And he does that because he felt that keeping the height a secret helps to preserve the dramatic impact of this particular waterfall fountain. So that is pretty much it for today's lecture, and we will resume next week.